his contributions in that. There was a scientist named Gregor John Mendel. He was actually an Augustinian monk. He was actually not a scientist. He was an Augustinian monk. He did his studies first on animals, that is rat, but the bishop of that church was against him for studying on rats. Then what he did, then he moved on to the pea plants. He considered those pea plants as his children and he started his scientific research on that plants. He was not a gardener, he was an amateur scientist who did his studies on the pea plants. He considered those pea plants as his children. So he did research on his children. So he proposed that why did he choose only pea plant for all his experiments? Because the pea plant is a biennial plant. It has 2 generations in one single year. So it can produce 2 generations of plants in one single year. And it has an easily identifiable and contrasting characters. So easily identifiable and contrasting characters were present in the pea plant, and cross-pollination could be easily done in these pea plants. And what were the visible characteristics of the pea plants he chose? A tall pea plant and a short pea plant. There were smooth round peas and crumpy wrinkled peas. There were green peas, yellow peas, there were white flowers, purple flowers, and there were grey seed coats and white seed coats. So these were contrasting and nice visible characteristics. So that is the reason he did his study on pea plants. So Mendel observed that characteristics are always present in pairs. So all these characteristics were always present in pairs. So this pair of contrasting characters is always called allele. Allele means a pair of characteristics. 2 characteristics make a allele, a pair of allele. So Gregor John Mendel suggested the laws of inheritance. He suggested 2 laws of inheritance. So the 2 laws of inheritance are law of segregation and law of independent assortment. What is law of segregation? Every individual possesses 1 pair of allele for a particular trait, right? 1 pair of allele will be there for a particular trait in each individual, but during the gamete formation, only 1 trait will be passed out, and that trait will be either dominant or recessive. So every individual possesses a pair of alleles for a particular trait, and during gamete formation only 1 trait will be passed out to the next generation, and that trait can be either dominant or recessive. So that is the law of segregation. And then what is the law of independent assortment? Next is law of independent assortment. What is law of independent assortment? Alleles of different characters separate from each other during the gamete formation. Alleles of different characters separate from each other during the gamete formation. That was his second law. So now let's see what all experiments he did on the pea plants and what were the results of those experiments. So Gregor Johann Mendel did his experiments on the pea plants. Okay. So you know now why he selected the pea plants, because they were very contrasting and visible characteristics, and they were biennial plants. That means 2 generations were produced in a single year. So he observed that there was a dominance trait in those pea plants, right? When we cross the tall and the short plant, it always resulted in only the production of tall plants. So thereby he concluded that tallness was a dominant feature in the pea plants. Same way, tallness was dominant over shortness, round seeds were dominant over the wrinkled seeds, plump seeds were dominant over the pinched seeds, and grey seed coats were dominant over the white seed coats. So some of the traits were always dominant. So there was something which is responsible for dominance of one particular trait. So what is that something? That something is nothing but gene. Same way like in human beings and plants also, gene is responsible for deciding which trait is dominant. So what he did some family planning for the pea plants. He acted as a god and did some family planning. See, a pea flower has both male and the female parts, that is anther, pollen grains, as well as the ovary part. So what he did, he self-pollinated those plants, and sometimes what he did, he cut off the pollen grains, that is the anthers, and brought some other pollen grains of other flower and spread it over the ovary. See, clear, right? He acted as a family physician, he acted like a god, he did some family planning. he took a pea flower, and what he did, he cut out the male part from the flower, that means anther and pollen grains he cut it off from the one flower, and bought the pollen grains of the other flower of the desirable characteristic. Whatever desirable characteristic he wanted of that plant, that trait he bought, the pollen and the anther from that plant he bought and put it on the ovary of this plant. So he did, that was the family planning. That means one plant had both male and the female parts, but he cut off the male part and bought the male part from the other plant and did the pollination by himself. And then he covered the plant with a polythene paper so that again no foreign object comes and disturbs the pollination, and thereby he developed the desired trait. So he acted like a god, he controlled the pollination, he self-pollinated it. He took a flower, he cut it the male parts, and to the female part he bought a male part from outside of the desirable characteristic and pollinated it. Then covered it with a polythene paper and then allowed the flower to fertilize and develop into a pea, because he wanted to give some desirable characteristics in that plant. So suppose capital A is regarded as the tallness and small a is regarded as the recessiveness. So capital A is dominant and small a is recessive. So when he did the cross fertilization for A and A, he observed that 3/4 of the plants were tall and only 1/4 were short. So the short feature was treated as the recessive feature, that is small a and A, and all the tall plants will had capital A feature. When again these plants were self-fertilized. So clear, right? He did some self-fertilization on the plants which were tall, and what he got the result? He got the result as 3/4 were tall and 1/4 were short, that is recessive. Capital A is indicated for dominant feature, small a is indicated for recessive feature. So wherever there is one capital A, it is always tall is dominant. Wherever there is two small a, recessive is dominant, that is short plant. So when he further continued the self-fertilization, first he himself self-fertilized the hybrid variety. So this is the fertilization of the hybrid variety. See, tallness was the dominant feature, and then the tall plants were the fertilized hybrid varieties. Those hybrid varieties he self-fertilized, and then he again continued the self-fertilization process. When he further continued the self-fertilization process, he discovered that when he crossed the tall plants with the tall, 1 out of the total 3 tall plants produced tall, and the other tall plants produced both tall and the short. Okay. So in the ratio of 3:1, 1 out of the total 3 tall plants produced tall, and here both tall and short were produced in the ratio of 3:1. And when he continued this, the short one bred only the short. So here tall ones, when they were further self-fertilized, they gave both tall and the short in the ratio of 3:1. But when the shorter variety was self-fertilized, the short ones produced only the shorter variety of plant. So they bred all the short variety, whereas the taller ones bred both short and the tall in the ratio of 3:1. So there is something here which determines that the plant should be tall or short. That something is nothing but known as the gene. So the gene is present in both male reproductive part and the female reproductive part, that is pollen grain as well as the egg. So gene determines the characteristic whether it is a tall or a short. So when a gene in the pollen grain and when a gene in the egg comes and meet, that means here they are in the sex cell, they are haploid. They come and meet, they become in the new offspring produced, they become diploid, that means paired. So this gene has 2 distinct alleles, okay, that is capital A and small a. So capital A is always regarded as the tallness and the dominant trait, and the small a is always regarded as the shortness or the recessive trait. Now let's see some more examples how to cross this tall and the short. So in the Mendel pea plant experiment, now we have understood that one gene comes from the mother, that is egg, then one comes from the father, that is the pollen grains or the anther. So one gene, one pair, one new offspring gene has 2 distinct alleles. The 2 distinct alleles will be capital A and small a. Capital A stands for tallness and small a stands for shortness. So whichever comes in the whichever is dominant will be expressed in the new generation. See, here capital A is dominant, so the new generation plant will be tall. So whichever gene is inherited from the parent generation, out of that the dominant gene will be expressed. So when suppose if the two parents are AA and AA, then the reproductive, all the cells will be tall, right? But only the sex cells will be having one single cell, haploid. See, all the cells of the body will be diploid, having capital A gene, whereas the sex cells will be haploid, only having single cell, single gene, capital A and capital A. When these haploid male and female sex cells meet, the child will be having only the tall feature, capital A, indicated by tall, which is the dominant feature. And suppose if the parent plants are small a and small a, that is the recessive feature, and then the haploid sex cells will be having single small a and small a. Then the new produced variety will be all small a and small a, that is stable and short. See, you have understood, right? The parent cells are having, the parent plants are having capital A, and the sex cells of that parent plant will also have single capital A. And when these two interact, the produced new variety will be all tall. If the parent plants are small a and small a, that is shorter variety. The sex cells will have single small a and single small a, that is the pollen and the egg. And the produced new variety of the plant will have all the small a, that is stable and the short variety of the plant. So Mendel did his experiments on this pea plant, after which when he crossed two parent plants, that is when he crossed one short and one tall plant, all the ones he got were tall. So what Mendel did, his first experiment was crossing a tall parent plant, pea plant, with a short parent pea plant. Then what the result he got was all the tall offspring. So this was named as the F1 generation or the Mono-Hybrid Cross. Okay, in the parent generation, the one tall plant and one short pea plant were crossed, and the generation which came next was named as F2 generation, in which all the total tall offsprings were produced. And then these tall offsprings, this is the hybrid variety now, right? This is the parent variety, and this was crossed, a hybrid variety was produced, in which all the plants were tall, and this was named as the F2 generation. When this F2 generation was self-fertilized, all the plants yielded were tall, and then see, in F2 generation all the plants yielded were tall. So when this F2 generation was self-fertilized, again what we got is 1/4 short and 3/4 tall. So F1 generation, two parent plants were fertilized, one tall and one short, and in the second generation we got all the tall plants, that is F2 generation. So when this F2 generation, that is the hybrid generation, was self-fertilized, in the F3 generation what we got was 3:1 ratio, 3 tall and 1 short. This is the Mendel's first experiment. So capital A and small a, the parent plant, tall and the short were fertilized, and one single reproductive cells will have one single AA. When they were fertilized, all the hybrid variety produced were tall, that is capital A small a, tall, and this is known as the heterozygous. Zygous is zygote, hetero is different. So over the, whether it is a tallness or shortness, it is expressed character, right? That is visible character. So that is known as the phenotype. And the combination of alleles at the gene level, whether AA or AA, that is known as the genotype. So phenotype here is the tallness or the shortness character, which is the externally visible character known as the phenotype. The part of the genotype that is expressed is known as the phenotype, and the combination of alleles at the gene level is known as the genotype here. So this was the Mendel's first experiment. This can be expressed as Punnett Square. Punnett Square is Punnett, Punnett Square. Here tall egg can be there or short egg can be there. Short pollen can be there, tall pollen can be there. So all this can be explained in the form of Punnett Square. See, here we have taken egg and here we have taken pollen, and it is indicated by capital A small a, capital A small a. So all the variety which was produced. So capital A will always be tall, small a will always be short, and capital A small a will be tall, but they may even breed short. So 1/4 variety is short, 1/4 variety is tall, and the half variety is tall, which may breed short. So this is the Punnett Square. Here hybrids were self-fertilized. Okay. So here we got hybrids, right? Those were self-fertilized. So 1/4 was completely tall, 1/4 was completely short, and the remaining half are also tall, which may breed short. So this was the Mendel's first experiment explaining monohybrid cross, which are represented as F1, F2 and F3 generation, and this is the law of segregation, Mendel's first law of inheritance. So this next is Mendel's second experiment. Here he did with dihybrid cross. Dihybrid cross means one plant having two characteristics, okay? And here he has explained the Mendel's second law. What is Mendel's second law? The law of independent assortment. What does it explain? That alleles of different characters separate from each other during the gamete formation. So alleles of different characters separate from each other and express independently during the gamete formation. So genes sort out independently of each other. Genes separate independently from each other and genes do not blend. That is independent assortment. See, for example, he has taken two colored parent flowers, say blue and green carrot flowers, and then he has cross-pollinated the parent flowers. And then in the F1 generation, he has got all the blue colored flowers. When he self-pollinated the F1 generation, then in the F2 generation, out of the 4, 3 were blue and 1 flower was green. So here what we can say is blue colored flowers are the dominant trait. Okay, blue colored flowers are the dominant trait. When F1 generation was self-pollinated, that means the fertilized hybrid variety was self-pollinated. The F2 generation, what we got was 3:1 ratio. In that 3 was the dominant trait, blue colored flowers, and 1 green was the recessive trait. See here he has done with dihybrid cross in the second experiment. See, to explain the law of independent assortment. So two characteristics more means what he have taken is one pea plant with round colored seed, with round shaped seed and green colored seed. Round shape and green color. And second one, he has taken wrinkle shaped seed and yellow color. Okay, shape of the seed is wrinkled and the color of the seed is yellow, and round shaped seed with green color. Seed of the pea is usually green, right? So green colored pea seed and the shape is round, and wrinkle shaped seed with yellow color. So that was the parent generation, and round is indicated with capital R, and wrinkled is indicated with small r, and green is indicated with small y, and yellow is indicated with capital Y. So he took the parent generation round green and wrinkled yellow. He cross-pollinated them. So what did he get in the F1 generation? He got capital R small y, that is round and green. And what was the next? He got small r capital Y, that is wrinkled and yellow, when he self-pollinated this hybrid generation. So what did he get in F2 generation? So what he did, Mendel, he took dihybrid cross. He took a plant with two characteristics, that is first one with round shaped seed and green colored seed, next one with wrinkle shaped seed and yellow colored seed. He cross-pollinated them. So what he did, the parent plant had round and green, that is capital R small y, and wrinkled and yellow is indicated with small r and capital Y. So the parents had capital R, small y, and small r, capital Y. And the sex cells have single cell, right? That is capital R and small r and capital Y. Because reproductive cells are haploid, they have only single cell, not paired cells. So these parent cells, from the whether it is a pollen or an egg, they meet and fertilize to form the F1 generation. What did we get in the F1 generation? We got round and the yellow. So now we have understood that round shape and the yellow color was the dominant trait. So when we self-pollinated again this F1 generation, what we have got is 9 round and yellow, 3 round and green, 3 wrinkled and yellow, and 1 wrinkled and green. So explaining this in Punnett Square is much better and easier way. See, when you have self-pollinated the F1 generation, what we have got is round yellow were 9. See here I have indicated with red color. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. So when we self-pollinated the F1 generation, we got round and yellow. That were the 9. Round and yellow is the dominant trait here. So next 3 were round and green. See, round and green is indicated with blue color here. Round and green, round and green, round and green. Next, what 3 we have got is wrinkled and yellow. It is indicated by green color. Wrinkled yellow and wrinkled yellow. And last, the one we have got is recessive trait is wrinkled and green. So wrinkled and green is this. So the ratio here is 9:3:3:1. So Mendel did his second experiment on dihybrid cross with plant more than 2 characteristics, round green and wrinkled yellow. In the first generation, round and yellow trait has been dominated. When the round and the yellow trait, that the hybrid variety is self-pollinated, we got the result in the ratio of 9:3:3:1. And this experiment explains us the law of independent assortment. Here the genes are sort independent of each other. Okay, and this is the Mendel's second experiment. And next, here we end the Mendel's pea plant experiments.